Hi, guys. So, I have a lot of questions for you guys tonight. So, I'm going to need you to interact with me, bear with me. This side of the room is very heavy. There's like nobody over here, a lot of people over here, but I heard that this side was more interactive, so maybe I'll be talking to you guys. Anyways, bear with me as we go through the next questions. They're easy questions, don't worry. To start off, who here would say that they are a good listener? Okay, not as many hands as I was expecting, but for all the good listeners in the room, the people who claim to be good listeners, how do you know what a good listener is? What are some traits that you might notice from that person? Listening, that's mind-blowing. Anything else? Active in the conversation. Think before they speak, absolutely. Eye contact, if you're talking to someone and they're just looking up here the whole time, doesn't really seem like they're listening to you. You want to be involved with people who are good listeners because we are selfish people. We like when other people listen to us. Have you guys ever been in a situation where you were talking to your friend and all of a sudden your friend stops talking and then you're like, I zoned out a couple minutes ago, don't know when, but I don't know anything of what they were just saying, and now I have to respond to this person as if I was listening to them, but in reality I was not. Have you ever been caught not listening? Have any of you guys ever been on the receiving end of that? You caught someone not listening to you? Yeah. How did that feel? Not good. Please listen to me. I have important things to say. Now, all of us pretty much raise our hands for we've either been in that situation where we were caught not listening or we had someone not listening to us. Why do you think that's such a struggle? Why is it so difficult for us? Yes. People get bored very fast. Absolutely true. We have short attention spans. Anything else? Yes. Don't care what they're talking about. Yes. A lot of times it just has to do with us being selfish, honestly. There are times where we would rather talk about ourselves and the things going on in our lives rather than listen to the people and the things that are going on in their lives. And I feel like one of the aspects that is so important for us as Christians is to be listening to people and to be loving to them. And you can love them by listening to them. Because once again, we live in a world where people are selfish and care more about themselves and people listening to them. And so when you go out of your way to listen to someone, be there for someone who's struggling, people will notice that there's something different about you. And then that could be an opportunity for you to maybe share why you're different. Oh, well, Jesus told me to love, so this is how I'm loving you, by listening. Now, this series, Pass It On, what have we been talking about in this series? Which is? Thank you, Annie. I knew that one person was going to speak up, and I was pretty sure it was you, and I was hoping you'd shout it like you did last time, but you didn't. That's okay, because you still got the point across. So, the good news of Jesus, which is that he died on the cross. Do any of you guys remember the big ideas from the past weeks at all? Any big standouts or anything? Our families, yes, we'll see more of that today. Pass on to your family, pass on to unexpected people, and you can pass on the good news with your lives. So, this is the final week of our series, Pass It On, and we are going to be continuing in the same book of the Bible that we've been in this whole series. Who knows what book of the Bible we're in? Gold star for Sam. She's a try-hard. She knows what book we're in. Good job, Sam. Proud of you. So we're going to be continuing in Acts. We'll be in Acts 16. So if you guys want to follow along, you can do that. It'll also be up on the screens. But we'll be taking a look at another cool story. So if you'll read with me. It says, once we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune-telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. When her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them to the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." So, Paul and Silas are just going about as they've been doing, trying to share the good news of Jesus, because that's what we see throughout the whole book of Acts. This was right after Jesus came down to earth, died, rose again, and now he went back up to heaven, and he gave his disciples the command of go and make disciples, go and build my church. And that is what Paul and Silas are trying to do here. They're trying to tell people about Jesus and tell people about the good news. And there is this female slave that is following them around and just shouting things at them. And this is going on for days. And finally, Paul just becomes so annoyed with it that he commands the spirit to leave her. And it does. Well, when the owners realized that now that she doesn't have that spirit that was providing her the opportunity to tell fortunes and they weren't going to make any money off of her, they got kind of upset. And so they brought Paul and Silas before the authorities, and they came up with this outrageous accusation to try and get them punished for what happened. It continues on to say, the crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered for them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. I want to pause here for a second and note on that. Paul and Silas had just been unjustly accused of this outrageous thing, and then they were beaten. They were thrown into prison, they're in chains, they're in jail for the night, and they're worshiping God. You would think that maybe they'd be upset in this situation, and understandably if they were upset because of what they had just endured, but no, they're not complaining about what they're going through, they're not angry with God, they're still worshiping him. And I think that's really cool, because I would say that pretty much all of us in this room, if we were in a situation like that, we wouldn't react that way, just because it's not common for people to react that way to things like that. It continues to say, suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. All at once, the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. So, Paul and Silas are in jail, and there is a violent earthquake that all the doors fly open, all the chains come loose, and then the jailer wakes up and realizes what had happened. And he remembered how he was commanded to guard these prisoners carefully, and now he thinks that they've all escaped. And so he draws a sword and he's about to kill himself because he would rather have that happen than face the punishment that the other people might bring. But Paul notices what's happening and he shouts to him, "Don't harm yourself, we are all here." And then the jailer is just overwhelmed, as we can see. It says he runs in and he falls trembling before Paul and Silas. And I'm sure that he had heard the good news that they were trying to preach, and hearing those things and then seeing their actions and the way that they handled this whole situation, I'm sure that that was what led to him then asking this question of, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Their actions and just things they were talking about and the way that they were acting, which was once again different than most people act, that was enough for him to say, "You're different, and I like that. I want to know why, and I want to know how I can be like that too." And so he took them home, he washed their wounds, he provided dinner for them, and then similar to how Lydia did in the last week that Jason talked about, he told his whole family about it. And then not only did he and his whole family accept Jesus, they were all baptized that night. And that's just a really cool example of how God was working through that whole time. Because once again, it started out really bad for Paul and Silas in terms of they were beaten, they were thrown into jail, and just it seemed like nothing was going right for them. But God was still working, and it ended up with this jailer and his whole family being saved and baptized. And that's really cool to see. Looking at the story, looking at Paul and Silas and just how they behaved, reacted throughout the whole story, what are some traits that you notice from Paul and Silas? Anything that stands out, Isaac? Incredibly faithful, absolutely. Anything else? Humble. Yes. Annie, you hit it right on the dot. What I was going to say was, I see humility. Now, what is humility? Who can provide me with like a dictionary definition? That's okay. Yes, putting yourself lower than someone else. There are many different ways to define it. So I brought one that I think goes along well with what we're talking about tonight. And it says that humility is about not, it's coming up on the screen eventually. Don't worry. I know you're on the edge of your seat. So, humility is about not drawing unnecessary attention to yourself and drawing attention to others or God instead. There it is. Round of applause for Tyler, people. Must be busy back there. Oh, it was Isaac. Thank you, Isaac. Round of applause for Isaac. Round of applause for the whole tech booth, honestly, because they do amazing things. So, grateful for them. So, in being humble, focusing on God or others and putting them first rather than yourself. And we see that in Paul and Silas a lot. Where were they humble in this story specifically? In jail. Once again, they could have been upset with God. They could have been very self-centered in, oh, this is so terrible that this is happening to me, which, once again, if they were, I'm pretty sure when we were reading that, we would understand. We wouldn't judge them for being like, why are you so upset about the fact that you were just beaten and thrown into prison for something that you didn't do? What they did was good. They commanded a spirit to leave this girl, and this girl was now free, but they were still punished for it. However, they were humble, and they knew that, and once again, as Isaac said, incredibly faithful, they knew that God was still working even in the midst of this terribleness, and so they didn't complain, they weren't angry with God, and they were worshiping him in that, which is the next way they were humble in their worship. Once again, worshiping when you're in jail, bleeding, in pain from your wounds, that's just not something that we could see many people ever doing, and they were doing that. And so that's, once again, just proves their incredible faithfulness. They were humble with their mercy. When the jailer drew a sword and was about to kill himself, they could have not said anything, and they could have just walked off and pretended like nothing happened, and the prisoners would have said anything, nobody would have said anything, and it could have been whatever. But once again, they knew that God had something in store, and they wanted to show him God's mercy, and so they said, no, don't hurt yourself, we're here. And then they got the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus, which is the next way they were humble with their message. And talking about actions and how important actions are, and as Christ followers, we want to make sure that our words are in line with our actions, we're acting in a loving way. That is what we can see in Paul and Silas. And in hearing what the jailer hearing what Paul and Silas were talking about, but then also seeing their actions, both of those things together was what led him to ask, sirs, what must I do to be saved? Because when you are Christ-like, when you are actively living to try and be more and more like Jesus, you are going to have people look at you and see that you're different. They're going to see a light when they look at you, and that is going to make them ask, why are you different? And you can tell them, well, I believe in Jesus, and Jesus tells me to love, and so that's why I love you. That's why I care for you. And just, it's an opportunity to share, opportunity to pass on the good news of Jesus. Being humble is critical to sharing the good news. And I think that one of the biggest things, one of the most important things for you to focus on is passing on the good news with humility and making sure when you are passing on the good news that your actions are in line with the things that you're doing. Because if you're saying one thing but then doing another, people aren't really going to want to pay attention to that. Have you guys ever had someone in your life who was maybe super hypocritical, super arrogant, or anything like that? Anyone you know? Yeah, when those people talk to you about certain things, did you want to listen to what they had to say? Probably not, because looking at their actions and the way that they treated people, you just didn't want to listen to them. And so that's why it's so important that we are kind to other people so that when they see, that can be an opportunity for us to share. There's another passage that I want us to read tonight, and it's Paul later on in his ministry when he's writing a letter to the Corinthians. And at no point does he specifically mention humility. However, you can see so much of his humility strewn throughout this passage. And so I want us to read it together. It's in 1 Corinthians, and it says, Yet preaching the good news is not something I can boast about. I am compelled by God to do it. How terrible for me if I didn't preach the good news. So pausing here right off the bat, immediately he's just saying that he has nothing to brag about. He's not trying to be like, oh, I'm so awesome because I'm preaching the good news. He's understanding that this is what God has called him to do, so he's doing it. And he's saying it would be terrible for him not to do it, which there's just so much humility in that and him understanding that. He continues to say, if I were doing this on my own initiative, I would deserve payment, but I have no choice, for God has given me the sacred trust. What then is my pay? It is the opportunity to preach the good news without charging anyone. That's why I never demand my rights when I preach the good news. Here he's saying that he doesn't care about personal gain. He doesn't care about money. He just knows that God has called him to preach the good news, and he wants to be able to do that. He wants to be able to bring the good news to everyone, and so that's why he doesn't demand his rights. That's why he doesn't expect payment. He just does what God has called him to do and trusts in God to provide to support his mission and what he's doing. He continues on in the next verse, and he says, even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I am not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I am with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. Here he's saying that when he's with people and he's aiming to spread the good news to them, he adapts to their law and their culture in order to come alongside them and more effectively share the good news. It's not that he's breaking the law. He's saying that he is obeying the law of Christ, which is just saying that he's following Jesus' leadership in that and trusting that Jesus' leadership is better than his own could be, which once again is a sign of true humility. In the last couple verses, he continues to say, when I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. In these last couple verses, and honestly just throughout the entire passage, you can see that Paul is showing that he cares more about other people and their needs than he does about his own. He knows that there are people out there who need Jesus and who have not heard about Jesus, and so he's doing everything he can to go out and spread the good news and tell those people, and he doesn't worry about himself and how he's going to be provided for. He just trusts in God to provide for him. He doesn't worry about what might happen to him and the persecution that he might face. He just, once again, is being faithful and trusting in God and in his plan. Talking about humility, talking about passing on the good news with humility, which, once again, is so critical. How do we do that? First step is to put others first. And now when I say put others first, I don't want you to hear me say don't take care of yourself. Obviously, you need to make sure that you are well so that you can effectively share the good news and effectively tell people about Jesus. But ultimately, you are here on this earth to worship God and serve others. And so you, as a Christ follower, that is your calling, and you need to be doing that. So you need to be putting others first. You need to be focusing on other people's needs and putting them above your wants, and just being mindful of how you can love the people around you, how they need to be loved, and how you can then use that love to show them Jesus and to have that be an opportunity to share. Or just quite frankly, there are people in your life that the only time they experience Jesus' love might be through you, because they might not be offered it a different time and they might not be offered to accept that. And so for you guys to step out and offer them Jesus' love is huge, because once again, all of us need that. And you might be the only chance that that person gets. Next thing in being humble is just making Jesus the focus. Now, obviously you guys have your stories and you have the ways that Jesus has impacted your life, and that's awesome. You need to be sharing those stories. There are people who need to be hearing your story. However, when you're sharing your story, make sure that you are focusing on the hero of your story, who is Jesus. Without Jesus, there is no good news. And so we need to make sure that he's staying front and center and not us focusing on our own stories and our own things that we did in that. Obviously, you can share, maybe you went through a dark period of your life and Jesus helped you get through that. So you can share that with them, and that will be huge. That'll be very impactful for them. And just making sure that you're not building yourself up in that, not being like, oh yeah, I went through this difficult period, but I got through it. I'm so proud of myself. Obviously, you should be proud of yourself for going through those things and coming out the other end, but understanding how big Jesus' role in that, because so much of that stuff wouldn't have happened without him guiding you. Next thing is just don't think you know everything, because you don't. And that might seem pessimistic. I honestly, personally find it comforting, just because I feel like a lot of times I feel the pressure to know everything. I feel the pressure to have all the answers to any question anyone might ask me about my faith, but I don't. And it's just comforting to know that I'm not expected to know that. God doesn't expect me to know that, and God doesn't expect you to know that either. God will provide you with the things that you need in order to share the good news, in order to effectively show his love. But at no point are you going to ever know everything. And if you feel like you've gotten to the point where you know everything and you could answer any question that anyone asks you, you need to check yourself, because that's just not true. You are not God. You're never going to have all the answers. You're never going to know everything. And understanding that you have to turn to God for his leadership and his answers to those questions is keeping you, once again, humble, understanding that he is the one who deserves the glory and that we should not be glorifying ourselves in that. Last thing is just to talk with people, not at them. When we're sharing the good news of Jesus, sometimes it can be tempting to start preaching a sermon. And don't get me wrong, sermons are great. However, when you're having a conversation with someone, they want it to just be that, a conversation, a relational conversation where you're talking to them, they're talking to you. You can ask each other questions. You can try and answer the questions. There's listening involved, talking about how important listening is. You need to be listening to the things that they are saying when they're sharing their point of view or asking you a question. And once again, just having it be a conversation with them rather than at them, especially because if you're talking at them, they might feel like you're talking down to them. And if you're talking down to them, they're not going to want to hear what you have to say. It's really important to recognize how much all of these things matter. Your actions, the things that you're doing, the way that you speak to people, the way you treat people, the way you love people, and the way you pass on the good news. Because ultimately, all of that can affect your relationships with people, and your relationships with people can affect how effectively you pass on the good news. And so, in talking about passing on the good news with humility, making sure that you're understanding that God is the star of the show, not you, and making sure you're understanding that he's the one that will provide you with all of the answers, and he's the one who will provide you with the hope and peace that you need, not things that you can provide for yourself. Part of being humble that I feel like is so important to grasp, and I really hope that you guys can grasp this now at this stage in your life, because there are times where I still struggle with this idea, but just understanding that you are not responsible for other people's eternity. You have responsibilities. Yes, as a Christian, you should be sharing the good news of Jesus. You should be sharing your story. You should be invite them to church, invite them to youth group, do all those things. However, the people have a choice in that. So if you invite them to church and they choose not to come, don't blame yourself in that. Don't be like, oh my gosh, I did everything wrong and now they're never going to come to church and they're never going to accept Jesus and it's all my fault. They have a responsibility in that as well in terms of their choice. And then God has the responsibility as well of understanding that God has a much bigger plan than you could imagine. There could be someone in your life who you have a conversation about church with and you invite them to go to church with you and they say no. And then you struggle with that doubt of, oh no, they didn't come to church with me, what now? But then 10 years down the line, you don't talk to this person anymore. However, someone else that they know invites them to go to church. And at first they're hesitant. They're like, no, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to go to church. But then they remember the conversation that you had. They're like, maybe church isn't so bad. Maybe I should try it. And then maybe they go to church. And then maybe they accept Jesus. And maybe everything is great. Or maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe more seeds need to be planted. The point is, God has a plan throughout all of that. A bigger plan than what we could even see, which is, once again, why being humble is important. Because we do not have all the answers. We do not have a master plan of everything. We don't know what's going to happen, but he does. So remaining humble and remaining faithful in that, and trusting that, yes, as a Christian, you have a responsibility when it comes to sharing and inviting, but also understanding that God has a responsibility in terms of providing the people and the things needed to bring those people to him, but then they also have that responsibility of their choice. It's really important to be keeping an eye out for opportunities that you have to share the gospel. And you can see these opportunities by the way you listen to God and the way you listen to people. So listening to God, obviously just whenever you feel he's saying something to you, of maybe you're walking and you see someone and they don't seem like they're having a good day and you feel prompted to pray with them. Maybe go up to them, hey, can I pray with you? Or prompting of maybe there's a friend who's talking to you about some difficult things going on in their lives, and you say, I'm really sorry to hear that. Do you want to come to church with me this weekend? I think that could be beneficial for you. But then also having just listening to other people and the conversations that you might be having. So listening to the promptings from God, but then once again, really listening to what the people are saying. You might have someone who talks about church and they're like, yeah, I haven't gone to church in a long time. I don't know if I'm going back. You could say, okay, why? Let's talk about that. And then maybe they've had bad experiences with churches. You talk about how it's not supposed to be that way. And then they're like, maybe I should go to church with you. Or maybe you have someone who's talking about how they just can't seem to find any peace in their life because there's just so much that's going on and they don't know what to do. And then you can talk to them about, yeah, sometimes I struggle with peace too, but luckily I believe in God and he gives me a peace that surpasses all understanding. There are so many opportunities that you'll have, but in order to fully see those opportunities, you need to be listening to both God and to others with the things that they're saying to you. If you are struggling because you feel like you have no idea how to pass on the good news, you have no idea how to share Jesus, how to share your story, how to do any of that, I highly, highly encourage you to come to the Pass It On Challenge. It is happening 2 Wednesdays from now on August 17th, and that night is just going to be us practicing. We are going to be sharing the good news. We are going to be sharing our stories. And it will be an opportunity for us to come together with the people that we know, the people that we're comfortable with, and to share those things and to feel safe in doing that. So maybe you share an aspect of your story, and then you're like, I don't really like how that came across. I feel like it could be more powerful. So you reword it and you do it this way instead, and you just have some idea of what to do. So that way, when you go out into the world and you do go to share the good news, you don't feel like you're just thrown into the deep end of a pool. You know what to say. You have an idea of what it is that God wants you to say and do in that situation. And so I know that there are going to be many good things that God brings out that night. So please come. It's going to be great and very important because, Paul says later on in his ministry, even later on in this, that whenever anyone asks you for the reason of the hope that you have, you should be prepared to provide them with an answer. And so if you are being an example, if you are being humble, if you are being faithful, if you are being a light, and people look at that and they ask you, why are you this way? Why are you different? You should be able to then share Jesus, share your story. And this is a great opportunity to have that preparation to do that. Talking about listening to God, we'll be practicing doing that right now because I will be putting up some questions on the screen, and we're just going to take a couple moments to just reflect on these questions. I want you to focus on which one you feel is calling to you the most right now. Which do you feel that God is putting on your heart? And there might be one that when you read it, you're like, oh, yeah, that is something I struggle with. And you might feel bad about that. I want to encourage you not to get caught up in that guilt. Acknowledging it is the first step to changing it. So just pray, God, this is an area that I really struggle with, and I need help in changing. So can you please help me to make that change? And I want you to look through the questions, feel which one God is calling you to do, and then come up with action steps you can take to work on it. And I want to encourage you to talk to your small group about it. Say, this is the question that I chose, and these are the steps that I'm going to take over the next couple weeks until the Pass It On Challenge happens. And I want you guys to hold me accountable in that. I want you to make sure that I'm doing the things that I said I wanted to be doing, because I want to be growing and I want to be doing what it is that God has called me to do. So we're going to take just like 30 seconds. We'll have some quiet music playing, and just take some moment, pray, reflect on what it is that God is trying to say to you right here, right now. God, I just want to thank you for today. I want to thank you for the opportunity that we have to come here and to talk about the good news. And God, first of all, I just want to thank you for the fact that we have that good news, the fact that you sent your son and that he died and rose again to save us, and that we can then share that good news with the people around us, God. I pray that you would help us as we are in this time working in order to be able to do that, and to do that well, to the point where people want to hear about you, God, and they want to come to you. I pray that you would help us to learn and grow in this time and effectively do that. I pray that we would have good conversation in our small group, and that we'd be able to hold each other accountable in the things that we're doing and the ways that we're trying to grow. And God, once again, I pray that you would just help us to focus on, we're here for you. We're here to worship you and to serve others and just to do as you say. And I pray that we would really be able to just focus on that and giving you glory through it all. Not giving the glory to ourselves, but giving the glory to you, because that's where it belongs. God, once again, I just thank you for who you are and everything that you do. Pray all this in your name. Amen.